The wedding ring sat on the cracked wooden table like an accusation that hadn't been spoken yet.
Gold, thin from 12 years of wear, catching the afternoon light through the boarding house window in a way that made it look more valuable than it was. Rebecca's fingers, rough from sewing and still pricked with needle marks.
Touch the band once, gently, the way you touch something you're about to lose forever. Then she picked it up, slid it off the table, and dropped it into the small leather pouch that held everything she owned now.
3 hairpins, a handkerchief with her initials embroidered in blue thread,
a photograph of a man who promised her a home, and now this ring that proved she believed him. The room smelled like lye soap and old wood. Downstairs, she could hear voices, the boarding house keeper, Mrs. Mary Washington, talking to someone at the door. Rebecca stood, smoothed the front of her dress, the only dress she had left, the one she'd been wearing when the sheriff came and looked out the window at the dusty street below, Copper Ridge, Texas, population 847. She'd lived here for 12 years,
raised 4 children in this town, buried a husband,
and now she was a stranger, the eldest boy, the one she'd rocked through fever dreams and taught to read, had signed the papers that erased her. The daughter she'd sewn a wedding dress for had stood silent and watched it happen. The 2 younger ones, barely more than children when she'd married their father, had looked at the floor and said nothing when the sheriff asked if she'd ever been cruel to them. They hadn't lied. They'd just said nothing, and nothing was enough. But we need to go back. Back to before the ring on the table.
Back to before the boarding house, and the sheriff, and the moment when family became strangers. Back to a spring morning in 1871, when Rebecca Lawson was 27 years old, widowed 6 months,
and standing in front of a ranch house that needed paint. The sign on the gate said Cartwright Ranch. The man who'd placed the advertisement in the Austin newspaper had said he needed a housekeeper.
A widower with 4 children and a cattle operation he couldn't manage alone.
$60 a year. Room and board. Sundays off. Rebecca needed work. She'd needed it since the cholera took her first husband, Daniel, and left her with a rented room she
couldn't afford and a reputation in San Antonio that wouldn't
let her forget she'd been a saloon girl before Daniel married her and made her decent. Henry Cartwright met her at the door. He was 43 years old, tall and sun-weathered, with grey in his dark hair and hands that shook slightly when he removed his hat.
He looked tired,
not the kind of tired that comes from one bad night, the kind that settles into your bones and stays. His wife, Margaret, had died in childbirth 14 months ago.
The baby died too. He said it simply, factually, the way a man speaks when he's said the same words too many times and they've lost their weight. 4 children.
Thomas, age 15.
Elizabeth, age 12. Samuel, age 10.
And Alice, age 8. They stood in a row in the front room like soldiers waiting for inspection.
Clean faces, mended clothes,
eyes that had stopped expecting kindness from the world. Rebecca looked at them. They looked back. I can cook, she said to Henry. I can sew and keep house and tend a garden. I am not afraid of hard work. Henry nodded. The children need a woman's hand,
not a mother.
Their mother's gone.
But someone who'll care. I can do that, Rebecca said. She started the next day. The house was falling apart in small ways. Loose hinges, cracked window panes, floorboards that creaked in the wrong places.
The stove door didn't close right. The pump in the yard needed priming every morning. The roof leaked in the back bedroom where the 2 boys slept. Rebecca fixed what she could and made lists of what she couldn't. She cooked meals that the children ate silently, quickly, like they expected the food to be taken away.
She washed their clothes and mended their tears, and let out hems as they grew. She didn't try to hug them. She didn't force conversation. She just showed up every morning and did the work, slowly, over weeks and then months. They began to soften. Alice started sitting in the kitchen while Rebecca cooked,
swinging her legs from the tall stool, asking questions about everything.
Why do you put salt in the bread? Where did you learn to sew like that? Do you know any songs? Samuel brought her a bird's nest he'd found, perfectly round, woven from grass and horsehair. He set it on the table without a word and walked away.
But the next day, He brought her a smooth river stone, then a feather.
Small gifts, a language he didn't have words for. Elizabeth was harder.
She was 12, and she remembered her mother clearly, and she watched Rebecca with eyes that measured every gesture against a ghost. But one night, when Elizabeth woke screaming from a nightmare, it was Rebecca who came. Rebecca who sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the girl's hair and sang a soft hymn until the shaking stopped. Elizabeth never thanked her. But the next morning, she set the table without being asked. Thomas, the eldest, kept his distance. He was 15, nearly a man, and he carried the weight of being the oldest son like a yoke he couldn't set down.
He worked the ranch with his father from dawn until dark. He spoke only when necessary.
He looked at Rebecca the way you look at hired help.
Polite, distant, unmoved. Rebecca didn't push.
She just made sure his clothes were clean and his meals were hot, and when he came in late from the pastures, there was always a plate waiting, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. 6 months after she arrived, Henry Cartwright asked her to marry him. They were standing in the kitchen. She was kneading bread. He was holding his hat, turning it in his hands the way nervous men do. "I know you came here for work," he said.
"And you've done good work.
"Better than I had any right to expect. But I've been thinking, the children need more than a housekeeper. They need stability, a name, a mother, even if she's not the one they were born to." He paused, looked at the floor, looked back at her. "I'm not asking for love, Rebecca.
I know that's not something you can order up like supplies from the catalog.
But I'm asking for partnership, for commitment.
I can offer you a home,
a place, my name.
and I'd be honored if you'd take it." Rebecca stopped kneading. Her hands were covered in flour.
She looked at this man who'd been kind to her, who paid her fairly, who never once looked at her the way men in saloons used to look. "Do the children know you're asking?" "I told them this morning."
Thomas said it was my decision. Elizabeth cried, "That I think she'll come around."
The young one seemed pleased. Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron.
She thought about the rented room in San Antonio.
The men who still remembered her face from the saloon.
The years ahead with no family, no roots, no place that would claim her when she got old. She thought about Alice's questions and Samuel Stone's and the way Elizabeth had gripped her hand during the nightmare. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the front room of the ranch house.
The circuit preacher spoke the words. Henry's ranch foreman and his wife stood as witnesses.
The children watched from the stairs. Rebecca wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself. Henry wore his Sunday suit. They spoke their vows clearly, signed the certificate, and became husband and wife under the laws of Texas and the eyes of God. That night, Henry moved her things into the main bedroom. He was gentle, respectful.
They shared a bed, but he never pressed her for more than she was willing to give.
In time, affection grew. Not passion, not the wild love of youth,
but something steadier. A partnership built on mutual respect and shared load and the quiet comfort of not being alone. Rebecca couldn't have children. She'd known since before Daniel died.
Something broken inside that no doctor could name or fix.
She'd mourned it once, deeply, in the silent way women mourn losses they're not allowed to speak aloud. But now she had 4, not from her body,
from her choice,
and she loved them with a fierceness that surprised her. A mother's love, fierce and complete, given freely to children who hadn't come from her, that had become hers all the same. She sat with Samuel when he had scarlet fever, sponging his burning skin with cool water, whispering prayers she'd learned as a child. She taught Elizabeth to braid her hair and sew a straight seam and stand up straight when men tried to make her feel small. She baked Alice's favorite cake every birthday and let her lick the spoon. She mended Thomas's shirts even when he didn't ask, even when he barely acknowledged her, because that's what mothers do. The years passed. The children grew. Thomas became a man, tall and serious, working the ranch alongside his father. Elizabeth bloomed into a striking young woman and married a banker's son from Austin. Samuel learned to break horses and read law books by lamplight.
Alice, the youngest, stayed wild and joyful, climbing trees and catching frogs and refusing to be tamed. Henry grew older. His hair went white. His hand steadied.
The weight he'd carried when Rebecca first met him lifted, slowly, year by year, until one evening he sat beside her on the porch and said, "You saved us, you know.
This family.
We were drowning. You pulled us out." Rebecca took his hand.
You gave me a home when I had none.
We saved each other. He kissed her forehead. It was the most tender gesture he'd ever offered. She held onto it. 3 months later, Henry was thrown from a horse.
A spooked mare.
A snake in the trail. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. By the time they brought him back to the house, he was gone. His neck broken, his eyes open.
His body still warm but empty of the man who'd lived inside it. Rebecca washed him herself,
Dressed him in his Sunday suit.
sat with him through the night while the children slept, whispering all the things she'd never said while he was alive.
"Thank you.
I'm sorry. I loved you more than I knew.
They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he'd planted the year Thomas was born. The whole town came.
The preacher spoke of a righteous man and a life well lived.
The children stood silent. Rebecca stood beside them, her hand on Alice's shoulder, and watched them lower the man who'd given her a name into the Texas earth. The will was read 3 days later in the front room of the ranch house. The lawyer, a thin man named Howell, unfolded the document and read in a flat, legal voice. Henry had left everything to his children.
The ranch, the cattle, the house, the accounts, split for ways.
Equal shares to Rebecca. He left a provision.
She could remain in the house for as long as she lived, provided the children agreed.
She would receive a modest yearly allowance from the ranch profits. Enough to live on. Not enough to be independent. The children agreed. Of course, they agreed.
Thomas shook the lawyer's hand. Elizabeth kissed Rebecca's cheek.
Samuel nodded solemnly. Alice cried and said, "You're staying, aren't you, Mama Rebecca?"
"I'm staying," Rebecca said, but she saw something in Thomas's eyes.
A calculation. A coldness that hadn't been there before.
Or maybe it had always been there, and she'd just chosen not to see it. The trouble started small. Thomas began making decisions about the ranch without consulting her.
Selling cattle. Hiring new hands.
Changing the way things had been done for years. Rebecca tried to speak up once, gently, suggesting they wait before selling the northern pasture. Thomas smiled tightly and said, with respect, "Rebecca, this is family business now, family business."
As if she weren't family.
As if 12 years of raising them, feeding them, loving them had been employment, not motherhood. Elizabeth visited less. When she came, she brought her husband, the banker's son, who looked at the ranch house with barely concealed disdain and spoke about land values and development opportunities.
She stopped calling Rebecca Mama, started calling her by her first name. Just Rebecca, casual.
Distant. Samuel left for law school in the East.
He wrote letters at first.
Then the letters stopped.
Alice, now 17, became quiet.
She spent more time away from the house. When Rebecca asked where she'd been, Alice said, "Out," and nothing more. Then Thomas married a woman from Austin,
Pale and polished and cold. Her name was Constance. She moved into the ranch house and immediately began changing things.
New curtains,
New dishes.
new rules. She told Rebecca, politely but firmly, that she'd be taking over the household management now.
That Rebecca's help was appreciated but no longer needed.
That perhaps Rebecca would be more comfortable in the smaller guest room, since the main bedroom should belong to Thomas and his wife. Rebecca moved her things.
She didn't argue. What would be the point?
1 year after Henry's death, Thomas called a family meeting.
All the children, now adults, gathered in the front room. Rebecca wasn't invited. She heard them through the door. Low voices. Serious tones.
When they emerged, Thomas asked to speak with her privately. "We've been thinking," he said.
About the will.
"About your place here." Rebecca's hands went cold.
My place? You're not blood, Rebecca.
"Father married you, yes, but we've been looking into the legality of that marriage.
And there are questions.
Rebecca's voice was steady, but her heart was hammering.
What questions?
Thomas pulled out a folded paper.
This is a statement from the preacher who married you and father.
Reverend Patterson. He says he wasn't properly licensed at the time.
That the marriage, while performed, may not have been legally binding. That's a lie. It's a sworn statement.
Rebecca. Thomas's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a man who'd already decided. We don't want trouble. We don't want to shame you. But legally, you may not have been father's wife, which means you have no claim to this house or this land. Rebecca looked at Elizabeth, at Samuel,
at Alice. They stood in a row behind their brother. Elizabeth looked at the floor. Samuel's face was stone. Alice's eyes were red, but she said nothing. You're putting me out, Rebecca said.
After 12 years.
After everything, we're clarifying a legal matter, Thomas said.
You can stay until the end of the month. That's generous.
More than generous.
We'll give you $50 and a letter of reference.
You'll find work, $50. For 12 years of mothering.
For sitting beside sickbeds and mending clothes and teaching them to read and standing beside their father's grave. I have nowhere to go, Rebecca said. Her voice was quiet now. Almost a whisper. That's not our concern, Thomas said.
And for the first time, Rebecca saw the truth.
She'd never been family.
She'd been convenient. And now she was inconvenient. The sheriff came the next morning.
A friend of Thomas's.
He was polite, but firm.
He escorted Rebecca from the house with the clothes on her back and nothing more.
Not her sewing kit. Not the photograph of Henry. Not the wedding ring she'd set on the dresser that morning. Too heartsick to wear it, she walked down the road. She'd walked every day for 12 years and didn't look back.
She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just walked until the ranch house.
Disappeared behind the hills, and the only sound was the wind in the grass and the beating of her own
stubborn heart. Mary Washington's
boarding house sat on the edge of Copper Ridge.
A narrow two-story building with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. A hand-painted sign in the window said rooms, and below it, in smaller letters, "Lord's Welcome." Mary herself answered the door. A black woman in her 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through her tightly coiled hair, and eyes that had seen enough of the world to know trouble when it knocked. "Help you?" she asked. Rebecca stood on the porch with nothing.
No bag.
No money. No story that would make sense.
I need a room, she said. You got money?
No, but I can work.
I can sew. I can cook.
I can. You can come inside, Mary said.
She stepped aside.
Before you fall over. The room Mary gave her was small.
A bed, a chair, a table, a window that overlooked the alley. It smelled like lye and old wood. It was the most beautiful thing Rebecca had ever seen. She sat on the bed, and for the first time since Henry died, she cried. Not quietly, not politely. She cried the way a child cries, big shaking sobs that hurt her ribs and burned her throat. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she lay down on the quilt, still wearing her boots, and slept. When she woke, it was evening.
Mary was sitting in the chair by the window, mending her shirt. You done?
Mary asked. Rebecca sat up, nodded. Good, 'cause crying don't pay rent.
But sewing does. I got a pile of mending needs doing, and my eyes ain't what they used to be. You do the work. You keep the room.
We're square, Rebecca said, and so she stayed. Mary Washington had been born enslaved on a plantation in Mississippi.
She didn't talk about it much.
Just the facts. Freed after the war.
Moved west with her husband, a Buffalo soldier named Nathaniel. He died of pneumonia in 1875.
She used his death benefit to buy the boarding house.
She ran it herself, took in anyone who could pay and some who couldn't, and asked no questions about where people came from, or why they needed a place to disappear. She and Rebecca worked side by side, mending clothes,
washing linens,
cooking meals for the boarders. They didn't talk much at first.
Just worked. But slowly, over weeks, over shared meals and long evenings sewing by lamplight, they began to speak. Mary told her about losing the boarding house once, 5 years ago.
A white man claimed she'd never properly paid for it.
Produced forged documents.
A judge who didn't care that she had receipts.
She lost everything.
Spent 2 years working as a laundress until a lawyer from Austin A black man named Frederick Tolliver took her case for free and got the property back. Law's a funny thing, Mary said.
It protects the people who write it. Everyone else got to fight. Rebecca told her about Henry, about the children,
About the marriage certificate she'd signed and the preacher who'd supposedly lied. About the sheriff and the $50 she never got and the ring she'd left on the dresser. They stole from you, Mary said.
plain and simple.
I can't prove it.
They have a statement. I have nothing. Mary set down her needle.
Looked at Rebecca with eyes that had fought judges and liars and won.
You sure about that?
Rebecca wasn't sure,
But she wanted to be. The coat came 2 weeks later.
A woman from the church, a widow named Mrs. Hale, brought a bundle of clothes to the boarding house. Donations for the poor. Rebecca sorted through them, setting aside what could be mended and what was to forgone. At the bottom of the pile was a man's coat. Heavy wool.
Dark grey. The lining was torn at the hem.
Rebecca almost threw it in the scrap pile.
But something made her pause. The stitching along the lining was uneven, not factory-made.
Hand sewn. Recently, she picked at the loose thread. The lining pulled away.
And inside, folded flat against the inner layer of wool, was a piece of paper. Rebecca's hands shook as she unfolded it. A marriage certificate.
Hers and Henry's, signed by Reverend Patterson, signed by the witnesses, dated April 14, 1871. Official,
Legal.
binding, at
The bottom, a note in Henry's handwriting. For Rebecca. In case they ever question, he'd known.
somehow he'd known that his children might turn.
Known that she'd need proof.
So he'd hidden it.
Sewn it into a coat lining.
A coat she'd mended for him a month before he died.
A coat that had been packed away after
The funeral and donated to the church and passed along until it found
its way back to her hands. Rebecca sat on the floor of the
boarding house with the certificate in her lap and the coat beside her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in
months. Hope. But there was more.
She reached back into the lining. Her fingers found another fold of paper.
Thicker.
Stiffer.
She pulled it out. Unfolded it. A will. Not the will the lawyer had read. Another one.
Dated 6 months before Henry's death.
Witnessed and signed.
She read it slowly.
Once. Twice.
Her heart pounding harder with each line. Henry left half of everything to Rebecca.
The house. The land. The cattle. Half.
Not a provision. Not an allowance. An equal share. He'd written it plainly. To my beloved wife, Rebecca, who has been mother to my children and heart to this home.
I trust her goodness over any claim of blood. And then, at the bottom, a second clause.
A clause that made Rebecca's breath catch. It has come to my knowledge that my eldest son, Thomas, is not my biological child. His mother, Margaret, confessed this to me before her death. I do not hold this against the boy.
He was raised as mine, and I have loved him as mine. But I fear his character is his true father's, a man of greed and cruelty.
I leave Thomas no more than what law requires, and I pray he proves me wrong. Rebecca sat on the floor of the boarding house until the sun set and the room went dark. Mary found her there, still holding the papers, still staring at the words that changed everything. You got something, Mary said.
It wasn't a question. I got everything, Rebecca whispered. The lawyer Frederick Tolliver came to Copper Ridge on a Tuesday. He was a small man with spectacles and a satchel full of law books and a reputation for taking cases no one else would touch.
Mary had sent for him. He sat in the boarding house parlor and read the marriage certificate.
Read the will.
Read them both again. This is legitimate, he said.
Legal. Binding. The will supersedes the previous one. It's dated later. The witnesses are credible. If you file this, Mrs. Cartwright, you'll get what's yours, Mrs. Cartwright. She'd almost forgotten the name was hers. What about Thomas?
Rebecca asked, what about him? Tolliver adjusted his spectacles. He is not disinherited.
Just reduced to an equal share with the others.
And the truth about his parentage.
That's stated, but not weaponized.
Your late husband was a careful man. He was a good man, Rebecca said. Then let's honor him.
File the will.
Claim what's yours. The courthouse in Copper Ridge was small.
One judge. One clock. Wood floors that creaked.
A Texas flag in the corner. Tolliver filed the documents on a Thursday morning.
By Thursday afternoon, the whole town knew Thomas came to the boarding house on Friday. He didn't knock. He shoved the door open and stood in the parlor, face red, hands shaking. "You're lying," he said. "That will is forged." Rebecca sat in the chair by the window. Mary stood behind her.
Tolliver stood beside the door, arms crossed. "The will is legitimate," Tolliver said calmly.
"The marriage certificate is legitimate. Your father's handwriting has been verified. The witnesses have testified. You have no case. She's a whore from a saloon."
Thomas spat.
"She tricked my father. I loved your father," Rebecca said quietly. "And I loved you.
"I raised you. I sat with you when you had fever.
I taught you to read. I mended your clothes and made your meals and never once asked you for anything but respect. You're not my mother." "No," Rebecca said.
I'm not.
"Your mother is dead.
But I tried to be.
And you've repaid that by throwing me out like trash." Thomas's jaw worked. His eyes were wild. "That clause about me, about my father, is true," Rebecca said.
Henry told me before he died. He loved you anyway.
"I did too. But he knew your character. And he was right." Thomas looked at her, at Tolliver,
At Mary.
He saw no allies.
No sympathy.
Just three people who wouldn't move. He turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Rebecca closed her eyes.
Let out a breath she'd been holding for months. "It's not over," Tolliver said. "He'll fight."
"They all will." "Let them," Rebecca said. "I'm not afraid anymore." The judge ruled in Rebecca's favor. The will was valid. The marriage was legal.
Rebecca Cartwright was entitled to half the estate. The ranch house.
The land. The cattle. Everything. Thomas contested. Hired lawyers from Austin.
They argued and filed motions and dragged it out for months.
But in the end, the law was the law. And the law, for once, was on Rebecca's side. She didn't move back to the ranch house. She didn't want it.
Too many ghosts. Too many memories.
Instead, she sold her half to a cattle company out of Houston. Fair price. Good terms. She kept one thing. The hill where Henry was buried. The cottonwood tree. 5 acres around it. That stayed hers. Forever with the money. She did 2 things. First, she bought the building next to Mary's boarding house.
Fixed it up.
Turned it into a dressmaking shop.
She and Mary ran it together.
Made dresses for the women of Copper Ridge and beyond.
Beautiful dresses.
Wedding dresses. Sunday dresses. Dresses that made women feel like they mattered. They hung a sign above the door.
Lawson and Washington seamstresses.
2 names. Equal. Side by side. Second, she used part of the money to fund Frederick Tolliver's law practice.
Gave him enough to open an office in Austin and take cases for people who couldn't pay.
Women. Formerly enslaved folks. Anyone the law tried to crush. "You don't have to do this," Tolliver said. "Yes, I do," Rebecca said.
The law failed me once.
"You made it work. Now make it work for others." He did.
For 30 years, Tolliver took cases no one else would touch.
And every time he won, he thought of a woman who'd lost everything and fought to get it back. Rebecca never remarried. She lived above the dress shop with Mary.
They grew old together.
Sewed together.
Laughed together.
Told stories on the porch in the evenings while the sun set over Copper Ridge. She never spoke to Thomas again.
Elizabeth came once, years later, to apologize. Rebecca listened, accepted the apology,
but didn't forgive.
Some things are too deep to mend. Samuel wrote letters. Rebecca answered them, polite,
distant. The way you write to someone you used to know. Alice came back. She was 25,
married to a rancher,
pregnant with her first child. She stood in the dress shop and cried and said, "I should have stood up for you. I was a coward." Rebecca took her hand. "You were a child. You are not anymore. Do better now." Alice did.
She named her daughter Rebecca.
Brought her to the shop every month.
Let her sit on the counter and watch the women sew. Taught her that family isn't blood. It's choice. Rebecca died at 61.
Pneumonia.
Quick and hard.
Mary sat with her at the end. Held her hand. "You got your justice," Mary said. Rebecca smiled.
"I got better than justice.
I got my name back." They buried her on the hill beside Henry.
Under the cottonwood tree.
The whole town came.
Not because she'd been rich, because she'd been right on her gravestone. Mary had them carved to lines. Rebecca Lawson Cartwright 18441895. He raised them.
She loved them. She survived them. And below that, smaller, in letters that took the stonecutter 2 days to get right, family is WHO stays. 20 years later.
A young woman walked into Tolliver's law office in Austin. She'd been cheated by her husband's family. Thrown out.
Left with nothing. Tolliver listened.
Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a file. Inside was a copy of a will.
A marriage certificate. A letter from a woman named Rebecca who'd fought the law and won. Read this, he said.
Then tell me if you still think you've lost, the woman read.
And when she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes and said, "What do I do?"
"You fight," Tolliver said.
Same as she did, and the fight went on. Passed down.
One woman to the next.
A chain of refusal. A legacy of not backing down, because sometimes the people who should love you will betray you.
And sometimes a stranger will show you what family really means. And sometimes the justice you fight for isn't just for you, it's for the next woman. And the next.
And every woman after who refuses to disappear. Rebecca taught them that.
Not with words. With a marriage certificate hidden in a coat lining, and a will that said, "I see you.
You matter. You were here. She was here. And no one could erase that. Not then. Not ever.